Okay, so I chose a topic of introvert and extrovert. I always thought this topic was very interesting, and I found out that the first one who came up with these terms was Carl Gustav Jung. He lived in the 1875 to 1961. Mm. He was a Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, and the system of psychology he developed was much more spiritual than the common mechanical that was used before. People were seen as machines with their behavior determined by physical or chemical causes. Uh, and at this time, science was developing very fast, and people became interested in knowing more about themselves. So that's why this theory was so interesting also for ordinary people. Um, all of his theories are called analytical psychology together. Um, it is a method of therapy aimed at treating mental disorders and also helping ordinary people to become more balanced and self-aware. It is an attempt to provide a map of the human psyche in order to understand more fully how it works. It is also an exploration of the deeper aspects of human psychology through study of religious beliefs, dreams, myths, symbols, and the paranormal. Jung was really into the spirituality, and he explained human psychology throughout all these terms, so it was very interesting to read. The basic of this theory is the process of individuation. The goal of the psychic development is the discovery of your unique self. And this process is what called Jung individuation, and it is one of the core concepts of the analytical psychology. The goal is to not be seen as collective, as a society, but to become more individual and to analyze individual with his individual thoughts and experiences. So what does it mean to be an introvert or an extrovert? There are quite few different explanations of these terms at this time, but I would like to know what you think, just like in few words, very short. If you can just say like one
I
sentence, two
I
sentences.
think I think it's about energy. I think it's about that introverts feed energy when they are alone, while extrovert they feed energy and they recharge the battery, so to speak, when they are together with people. At least that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the same. But I've always had a question for myself whenever, also on the school day, they asked you, are you introvert or extrovert? I'm facing a problem here because I'm more of the extrovert, but there's a part of me inside that can be an introvert sometimes. So it's just like on your topic, I'm trying to, when I listen to you, I want to figure out if it's possible to kind of have, this percentage in both of the sides, or is just
I will
like
try
one
to
straight.
explain it.
Yeah, okay.
Jimmy?
Yeah, when you and I talked the other day, we really quickly agreed that for you and I specifically, we both found it funny that you and I got matched on this topic because most people, including myself, would say that I am very extrovert, and we also agree that you are very introvert. None of us are wrong or none of us are right, but I would say we are the prototypical types of introvert and extrovert.
We could say that.
Yeah, and it's not bad. It both sides has its pros and cons. As Hans often says to me, I need to remember that I have two ears and one mouth, and sometimes I would say to you, speak out more, but it's not easy to change who you are.
Agnes?
I personally don't think that there is such a current explanation for one or another, like the same as Gabi, because I mean, I am personally also like, I don't even know how to call myself, because sometimes I'm feeling very, very introvert that I don't want to have anybody around. Sometimes I feel very extrovert. So I don't think there is something that you can really define currently. Okay, this is just this and nothing more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so as you said, there are many different definitions, but there are few nowadays that are focused on the behavior. So people usually say that it's about how sociable people are, how they see common things very differently. For example, when you say weekends, the extrovert might think that it's time of the week when they can be around a lot of people, go to parties and have fun. And for the introvert, it would mean that they can have time alone, read their favorite books, or have some quiet me time. Another definition is could be where people draw their mental energy from, that the introvert needs to be alone and is exhausted when interacting with a lot of people, and for the extrovert is the opposite, that they draw the energy from environment and social interactions. Some people also say that it's how people deal with their with the outside world versus how they deal with their inside world. If they focus on their thoughts much, or if if they like to think a lot. um, According to Jung's theory, there are two attitudes. So this is my reading part, and one will be about extrovert and one for introvert. So for the extrovert, as a consequence of the general attitude of extraversion, thinking is oriented by the object and objective data. Thinking in general is fed on the one hand from subjective and in the last resort unconscious sources, and on the other hand from objective data transmitted by sense perception. Extroverted thinking is conditioned in a large measure by the latter than by the former. Judgment always presupposes a criterion. For the extroverted judgment, the criterion supplied by external conditions is the valid and determining one, no matter whether it be represented directly by an objective, perceptible fact or by an objective idea, for an objective idea is equally determined by external data or borrowed from outside, even when it is subjectively sanctioned. Extroverted thinking therefore need not necessarily be purely concretistic thinking. It can just as well be purely ideal thinking, if for instance it can be shown that the ideas it operates with are largely borrowed from outside, have been transmitted by tradition and education. So in judging whether a particular thinking is extroverted or not, we must first ask, by what criterion does it judge? Does it come from outside, or is its origin subjective? A further criterion is the direction the thinking takes in drawing conclusions, whether it is principally directed outwards or not. And for the introvert, introverted thinking is primarily oriented by the subjective factor. At the very least, the subjective factor expresses itself as a feeling of guidance, which ultimately determines judgment. Sometimes it appears as a more or less complete image, which serves as a criterion. But whether introverted thinking is concerned with concrete or with abstract objects, always at the decisive points, it is oriented by subjective data. It does not lead from concrete experience back again to the object, but always to the subjective content. External facts are not the aim and origin of this thinking, though the introvert would often like to make his thinking appear so. It begins with the subject and leads back to the subject, far though it may range onto the realm of actual reality. With regard to the establishment of new facts, it is only indirectly of value. since new views rather than knowledge of the new facts are its main concern. It formulates questions and creates theories. It opens up new prospects and insight, but with regard to facts, its attitude is one of reserve. They are all very well as illustrative examples, but they must not be allowed to predominate. Facts are collected as evidence for a theory, never for their own sake. Then I included also this another part where he mentioned that introverted thinking appears as something quite arbitrary, while extroverted thinking seems dull and banal. Thus the two orientations are incessantly at war. I thought that this thought was very interesting, how he explains how different these two types of thinking are. So not to be confused, what he basically says is that in psychology, for anything to happen, you need the subject and the object. The subject would be someone to understand, and the object would be something to be understood. And it can be anything that exists apart from the subject. It can be an idea, it can be a physical thing or event, or really anything. So everything in psychology depends on how these two, on the relationship these two have. For the extrovert, he is focused on the information that reaches the subject from the object. He considers his own personal opinions and ideas secondhand because he gets most of the ideas from the outside world. He orients his personal ideas depending on objective data. Jung goes to very further descriptions of extrovert and introvert, and he described extroverts as being friendly, enthusiastic, that they thrive in social situations. They are thick-skinned. The influences on them don't go very deep, and the stimuli have very little effect on them. There is an inner coldness. He keeps a safe distance from the object. He doesn't have the need to form his own opinions because it is replaced by the large number of perceived stimuli from the environment. He is not very emotional, and he never fully realized what his own motives are. He is unable to be self-critical and tends to be high-handed. He hardly perceives his inner world. He is usually down-to-earth person, often identified by his career, and he is always conforming with the facts from the environment. On the other hand, the introvert is focused on the effect that the object has on the subject. So he is usually focused on the subject and orients himself towards subjective data based on his own personal ideas. The description of the introvert is that he rejects external influences. He is very critical, individualistic. He needs personal space and time alone. He is thin-skinned, and the impressions on him strike deep and affect him greatly. He protects himself by being cold and unfriendly. He tends to miss opportunities. He is envious and jealous of the extroverted type who seems to have much easier time in life. He's aware of his motives and intentions. He is self-destructive with self-criticism. He is usually full of himself, and that is why he comes across as reserved. He's also easily offended, but has a great capacity for empathy and is more interested in views rather than facts. Then there is the tale of the smart Christian. A Christian is continually thrown into the arena, but the wild beasts never touch him. Caesar summons him and promises him freedom for revealing his secret. The Christian says that he let the lion get close and then whispers in his ear, "Would you please say a few words after the meal?" The apparently extremely introverted lion loses his appetite at the thought of having to make an after-dinner speech. So this is just to illustrate how introverted mind works. From the scientific point of view, there is also an explanation how it works in the mind of introvert and extrovert. It is described as the secondary phase. The secondary phase is the restitution phase of a stimuli nerve cell, where the absorption of the stimulus would be the primary function. The psychiatrist Otto Gross created a very graphic model of these two attitudes. What it basically means that the secondary function regresses, that only when the secondary function regresses is the cell once again in position to absorb new stimulus. It says that our nerve cells in the brain are affected by the stimulus, and in the introverted mind, the cell is only capable of dealing with one stimulus at a time. There is a high amplitude because it affects him greatly, and he needs a longer time to deal with the situation or with the stimulus. So that is called prolonged secondary function. Yeah. He also says that the new stimuli cannot be perceived during the secondary function, and some people are born with the prolonged secondary function. This is also what Jung says, that our psychological type is already inborn with us. So introvert needs less stimulating environment to focus because they cannot accept more stimulus at one time. So for example, they need a separate office because when they work in a crowded environment, they simply cannot focus. So they also need time to recharge so they can perceive new stimuli. On the other hand, for the extrovert, the influences on him don't go very deep and stimuli have little effect on him. He has so-called shortened secondary function and he is hungry for new stimulus. What it means that he has a small amplitude because it doesn't affect him very much, and he just absorbs it and is ready for the new stimulus. So this is called shortened secondary function. This is also why most extroverts are good with multitasking, because they can focus on more things at the same time and working on different projects. According to Jung, each person has both attitudes, but only one dominates in a personality. The other one becomes unconscious and finds other way to express itself. Jung also talks a lot about how the other attitude expresses itself through dreams. For example, so he says that there is always a tendency to be more introverted or extroverted. Nobody is fully one or another. It can be imagined as a spectrum, so you can either be more on one end or on the other hand, but it's not that you can be fully one or another because you have both of the attitudes. Then there is a type of this attitude called ambivert. It is a person who has a balanced introvert and extroverted personality, and he's in the middle of the spectrum. Usually it's like 50% he's introverted and 50% extroverted. So they have the best of the both worlds because they have balanced personality. That's why it can be answer to your questions previously, because some people can feel the same as the both attitudes in different situations. So it's that you like to also go to the parties and stuff, but you need time to recharge, so you don't have so you are ready for the new stimuli and the new experiences. Except of these two or three attitudes, Jung also describes the personality in 4 other functions. There are 2 opposite pairs, giving them a feeling of balance. There are rational functions and irrational functions, and the rational functions are thinking and feeling. They rely on internal mental processes, and they determine the way in which a person judges and evaluates experiences. The irrational functions are sensation and intuition. They rely on objective stimuli, and they determine the way in which a person perceives experiences. Jung says that a person's conscious orientation will be towards one of these functions, but again, he says that we have all 4 in our personality, and our goal in life is to balance them all, so we have everything balanced. The thinking personality type is good at seeing cause and effect, reaching logical conclusions. He may appear cool and emotionally distant. He is good at adapting to new circumstances and good at decision making. The feeling type is not used in an emotional sense, but rather putting things in order of value. He has a strong sense of traditional values and is usually warm and creative people. The sensation function rely on sensory impressions. This type of people assess their world by how things look and what words sound like. They rely on the senses. It involves perception rather than judging of information. They usually lack imagination, are happy and easygoing. They have a calm nature and are good at looking and listening. The 4th function is intuition. These people may be dreamy and ungrounded, impatient, not very practical. Jung says that they have an ability to see around the corners, so they are very good at focusing on possibilities. There are few arguments that could be said against Jung. People have very hard time understanding him. He was also one of the people who was not understood fully. His analytical psychology is too different from the mechanic scientific approach in psychology, and many scientists and psychologists don't accept it. The typology is only based on Jung's clinical practice and experiences. He was working as a psychiatrist at the hospital, so he was working with his private patients. He is too focused on spirituality, mythology, and symbolism. His descriptions are over-explained, and nobody could fit 100% to any of the personality types. Jung also explains this claim because he says that, of course, nobody could fit 100%, and his descriptions are not meant to divide people, but rather explain the behavior and the patterns that they experience. He was also criticized for encouraging people to focus mostly on themselves, and the critic says that he didn't put enough attention to relationship with others. It's because he was focused on the process of individuation and not so much on the relationships. The positive effect of Jung's typology is that it encourages people to be more aware of themselves. Jung believed that we are meant to progress and not just to adapt, as many Freudians would. He set the foundation for further research and implementation of these personality types. For example, the Myers-Briggs type indicator is usually called just MBTI. Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers were fascinated by these personality types. When Jung said introvert and extrovert, it got caught very quickly, and people started to use these terms, but not so much the other four, the sensation and the other three. So these women were fascinated by the other ones and thought that they should be used further and analyzed. So they based their research and their work on Jung's typology. Nowadays, it is the most popular personality test, and people are also sometimes asked to do it before they go to a job interview or before they apply for a job, because it gives the interviewing person a good indication of what their personality is and how they would fit into the team of the people. The test is 130 questions and is divided into 16 personality types. What it tells you is your likes and dislikes, what career would suit you the best, your compatibility with other different personalities. It is not judgmental as many of the other personality tests. It tries to open your personality up for exploration. The Myers and Briggs also developed their own definitions of what it means to be an introvert or extrovert, and they said it's about how person manages their energy. So introverts are energized by spending quiet time alone or with a small group, and they tend to be more reserved and thoughtful. The extroverts are energized by spending time with people and in busy, active surroundings. They tend to be more expressive and outspoken. The thinking and feeling functions. The thinkers tend to make decisions with their heads. They are interested in finding the most logical and reasonable choice. And the feelers tend to make decisions with their hearts. They are interested in how a decision will affect people and whether it fits in with their values. The sensing and intuition focuses the sensors are called the people who use this function, focus on their five senses and are interested in information they can directly see, hear, and feel. They tend to be hands-on learners and are often described as practical. Intuitives focused on more abstract level of thinking. They are more interested in theories, patterns, and explanations. They are often more concerned with the future than the present and are often described as creative. The judging and perceiving. The judges appreciate structure and order. They like things planned and dislike last-minute changes. The perceivers appreciate flexibility and spontaneity. They like to leave things open so they can change their minds. These two functions were not previously included in the Jung's typology, but Myers and Briggs added these two because they thought there was something missing in the personality descriptions, and these two functions explain how organized are you, and what works for you, because some people are more flexible and spontaneous, and some people need structure and order. So at the end of this test, you will be left with these 4 letters, which would describe your personality type. And you can also see how big percentage of population has the same personality as you, so you wouldn't feel like nobody gets you or nobody understands you, because there are people like you. It also gives you a long description, a few pages about all the other things that I mentioned before. So it is easy to read and navigate you and trying to understand you. So can we change who we are? According to Jung, of course we can. There is a case of Gustav Theodor Fechner from one of the books that I read. He studied medicine, physics, and chemistry in the university. He was an appointed professor of physics in Leipzig. When he was 39, he had a serious crisis and he couldn't teach for 3 years. He had manic depression, probably caused by his failing eyesight. Fechner locked himself in a room painted black, had his eyes bandaged, and took hardly any food. At the end of this incubation period, as he called it, he believed that he had discovered a universal force just as important as gravity. When he first opened his eyes again in his garden, he realized that the flowers had a soul. He wrote a few books, The Inner Life of The Inner Life of Plants, the booklet about life after death, The Things of Heaven and the Beyond. So he changed his chair in physics for one in philosophy. The symptom, in this case his failing eyesight, interfered with his essentially extroverted physical activities, and he couldn't be so extroverted anymore when he spent time alone in a dark room. So it made him to look inwards and become introverted. So from being a precise, objective, rational, natural scientist, he became a natural philosopher, making highly irrational subjective speculations. Jung also says that our personality changes throughout the life because the process of individuation is a lifelong journey and it never ends also when you get old. So he says that everybody seeks growth and wholeness, and that's the reason why we should focus on the individuation and knowing yourself.
This example with Fechner, is that
Yes.
one that Jung takes out?
It was in the book describing Jung, so I'm not really sure.
All right.
But it was just an example of how it could work in life.
Yes.
When something tragical happens that affects your life very much, that in some cases you can change your personality very, very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So Jung also said that a person's psychological type can be recognized from early childhood, and the parents should know the personality type of their children because it can help them to raise them and to raise them properly. And it also determined by different factors such as genetics, the parental type, because the child may identify with one parent and copy their behavior. It's usually the one parent that they like more than the other, and they may also develop an opposite type in order to rebel for this parent, so they would be annoying. It's also determined by social factors such as school, family, and friends because of the social interactions. And he also speaks a great deal about how children see different behavior. How would I say this? They also see that different behavior is rewarded, so maybe they will try to imitate that behavior. For example, when they see that someone is active and they want to be rewarded as well, then they might try to imitate that behavior to get the reward. So my opinion on the subject is that there are no two same people and there are so many different personalities, so we should always respect each other. Also, I learned that people cannot be put into boxes. There are so many personality theories and types, and you can never fully identify what a person is and write it down because personality changes throughout the life and you can never know for 100%. Also, I learned that there are people who understand you and feel the same because they have the same personality traits. I would like to just say an example when you know that feeling when you talk to somebody and you just know that they get you, because it's so rare, but it also happens. Like you just feel so understood because you don't need to explain it. They just know how you feel and they feel the same way. So another thing is don't judge what you don't understand, because there is so much we don't understand and so much we don't know. So we should never judge the other person. And these personality types is a way to lift us and not to limit us. There are many examples and articles that I read about people who discovered their personality types. For example, that they are introverted, and they since then they changed their behavior because they felt that they need to fit in this box of being an introvert. So they didn't do the things they would normally do, and they also said no to meeting with their friends because they thought that now when they are introvert they should fit in this box and in this description, and they should behave in that way. But it's of course not with this intention. So how can it help you to know your personality type? It is important to know yourself and know what makes you happy, because if you don't know that, then nobody else will know that. So you need to know that first. It can help you to choose a job. If you know that you are more introverted and you cannot focus in like a very loud environment and open office space, then you probably shouldn't choose a job like that, because you would feel exhausted every day and you would not perform good at the job, and it would probably never make you happy. So you should probably focus on something where you can be creative and probably have like a separate office or work from different environment. It can also help you to search what to search for in a life partner. I saw many videos and read a lot of articles about this as well. Jung also focuses his theory on the relationships with these personality types, and it's very interesting because there are no two personality types that 100% fit to each other, and he says that we are always excited and interested in the opposite of what our personality type is. But when we become partner with this person, it will throughout the time start being annoying because we are so different. So so you would probably break up in the end because it would just not work. It is also not good to become a partner with the same personality type, Jung says, because if you are two very introverted people who just like to spend time alone, then it would be a very weird relationship where you don't talk to each other or just sit apart in separate rooms. But these are the extreme cases, what Jung described. Knowing about these personality types, also maybe not discovering your own, but just to have an overview, is helpful in knowing how to interact with people. For example, when we learned about facilitation, where you need to read people and read the room and know what the other people feel, it would help you much more if you had an overview or knew about these personality types. The same in the leadership and management. You probably cannot lead a team of people if you don't know them and don't know what motivates them. So you should read something up. It also can help you in a way to understand that you don't need to explain your reasons to others, and it's okay to feel the way that you feel, because you don't need to explain it to others because they will simply not understand. So just do what makes you happy. It can help you to recognize patterns in your own behavior and your reactions to different situations. and in the same way safe on therapists, because you know yourself the best. And that's basically what therapists does, because they study psychology, and they try to recognize how you react to different situations and how you communicate with people, and try to put you in one of these boxes and analyze you. But Jung says that it is our job, each person individually, to do this by ourselves, because in the end it's the most important that we understand ourselves. I would like to end this with a short quote from Jung. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. I think it's a very nice said that how two people interact with each other, that they will always be transformed.
Can I have this one on my Facebook profile?
Sure. Okay, so what do you think now when you heard all the descriptions?
I think it's great. I think we should.
Oh,
Comment, question.
okay, I thought Peter was going to say something. Okay, so answer to my question, when I'm not sure if I'm the extrovert or introvert, I think this pretty helped me, because like you mentioned that an extrovert people can go out and go to the parties and do stuff, but then they need to recharge. And I'm kind of at that point, because I like going with people. I love it. I'm really an extrovert person, but I have these days in my life when I just like, I need a rest, you know. I need to kind of sit down with myself. I have a book or do whatever. So I think it opens up the answer that, yeah, I'm in both of those personalities at some point. And
Yeah.
the bigger part, of course, is the extrovert part, but I think the introvert part is pretty important for me as well. So I think I'm in the point with the between them two.
I have a technical question. I just want to know if you know it. There is the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I think it was really interesting that you pointed out that there is a redefinition on some of the parameters, and there are some of the parameters in the Myers-Briggs that they invented for the purpose that is not with Jung. There is also something called a Jung type indicator. Do you know that?
I have not checked that.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. It's just because I know some guys who are authorized in doing that, and I was curious if you know anything about the difference between the
I
Jung.
probably saw some websites about it, because I saw so many.
Yeah.
Also from different personality tests, but I really don't remember.
You know. The last thing you mentioned or one of the last thing you mentioned was that you save money on the therapist because you know yourself the best. Why, if that's true, why did Jung then continue to work as a professional psychiatrist?
Because many people are not interested in the work of trying to get to know themselves, and it's much easier to talk to other person who knows about it, and they can point you in the right direction when they know what you need. But I also have been to therapists a few times, but I was surprised that it didn't help as much as I thought it would, because basically what they do is they ask you questions, and they want to get you to talk about your issues. So it's still about you and what you think is important to that question, about your associations in the brain and what you answer to it.
But I think it's a common thing in psychotherapy that you need to be aware that the patient has to do all the work.
Yeah.
The psychologist can't fix anything. He or she can help the patient have this guide, or help themselves, you could say.
Yeah.
There's another thing relating to that has been much disputed in parts of, well, philosophical psychology. It seems, at least to me, that Freud and Jung would agree on a certain proposition, saying, if you have a mental problem and you sort of making to the surface of consciousness, you elevate it to the surface of consciousness, it is there in the unconscious, and then you take it and are conscious about it and you see it, then it would sort of evaporate itself, or it will heal itself or something the moment you become conscious of it. You know, if you had this problem with, you have a sexual trauma about your father when you were 2 years old, the moment you know that this is what happens, then everything gets better. That's sort of the idea. Is that true?
I am not so sure if it's a trauma or something. I don't think that only recognizing the fact would heal you. You would still need to deal with it throughout the time, and it would never just disappear and go away.
No.
But I also think that identifying the problems help a lot, because people usually have the problem that they just feel bad and they don't know what's going on. So that's the time to go to a therapist or psychologist, because they know what questions to ask and how to point out the things that you need to identify.
Okay. It's just because there's no, as far as I know, there's no agreement in psychology at all about this question.
No.
Everybody would disagree and go in each different direction. A last question I have from my side is, you mentioned in the beginning the individuation process, which is big in Jung, but as we talked about also when we had supervision, it's from a different book. It's not from the personality types book, and that's fine. But I was thinking, but it's true that individuation is a big thing in analytical psychology. What exactly is the coupling here, do you think? Why is individuation important to these psychological type things, or vice versa? Could you say something about that?
Yeah.
If you...
I included it in this presentation because I thought that it's important to mention it together, because it was a huge part of Jung's work. He focused on the individual and the development of each individual personality. And from the articles and books that I read, it described that Jung was really focusing on each individual person. Also, when he had the patients, he was talking to them for very long hours, trying to go very deep into their issues and focusing on it from different perspectives. And it was so much different from the other psychologists, because they had these other theories that they identified, and most of them didn't agree with Jung and his thoughts. So I thought that the process of individuation was important, because it was part of identifying your own personality type, I think, in his theory. So that was important, to identify yourself and understand yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Some of the things that you said, Teresa, reminds me of something that leans up against what I talked about, language. Sometimes when you say things out loud, I at least tend to understand them better. If you have an idea and you say it out loud, you can sometimes get a better understanding of what the idea actually is. And my point is that when you actually talk to somebody about your problems or your issues, you can say you identify them and kind of get a more understanding of what is actually the problem. Why are you sad, or why are you struggling with this and that problem? So it's I don't completely agree with it that you should save money on your therapist, but some just talking to somebody about stuff helps a lot.
It can also be seen as a perspective that save on the therapist. that you try to identify these things before you go there, so it takes
Exactly.
less time and less money.
Sometimes when you're love struck and you're really sad,
Yeah.
you talk to a friend. That friend can't bring your ex partner back, but sometimes just talking about your problems helps a lot, even though people can't help you or change the situation. And I found it very interesting that your analysis of the extrovert person, when you and I talked about a week ago, we talked about if we believe in fate and in destiny, and do we believe in star signs and all that, and we had an interesting discussion about that, and you said that you could identify yourself in some of the models that you found throughout this research, and I said that I honestly think that sometimes it's bullshit, but I honestly could recognize myself in what you said about the extrovert, and I also agree with Gabia that I'm really extrovert, but I also have the feeling that if you don't know yourself and if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. If you can't stand your own company, then other people might not want your company as well. So I also often enjoy my own company and try to prioritize being alone in order to get to know myself as well as I can, and to be able to understand myself around others, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
That's my personal observation.
I also love the point when you talked a lot about you have to understand yourself, you have to know who you are, and to do it in the way it makes you happy. So you actually, because you're the only person you're going to live your life with. So what I figured out also that this is the really hard thing to actually fall in love with yourself and take care of your personality. But when I moved to Denmark, things literally just changed. So I also agree on the fact that we are able to actually change this kind of point. Because before that, I was just like, blaming myself for such a stupid stuff that it's like not even really relevant. But then you start to live on your own, or you see a new place, new people. Talking with them helps as well. I also visited the therapist. She was amazing, but yeah. And everything like this is just like kind of really changing it. So I really like the point that you're actually trying to tell people, come on, love yourself now,
Okay, I'll stop the recording here.